and welcome to the Second Tier Podcast. I'm Ryan Dilks, and I'm joined by the Paul Lambert to my Kieran McKenna. It's Justin Peach.
Good day to you, Ryan.
Justin, always a pleasure to see your face on a Thursday morning to have a little natter about some midweek championship action. How are we keeping?
We're keeping great. The championship is as, busy as it is. We've had the VAR controversy, which has fueled the week as well. I'm geared up to talk about football. It's been a fun week so far.
It certainly has been a full week, and I was watching the Champions League last night with the Newcastle game. What a great game that was, as well as the Bristol City game, of course. But I was watching and I saw Jamal Lascelles, and I just thought to myself, I played against him once. And now he's playing against Kylian Mbappe. And I think that's quite a contrast.
Yeah, not at academy level. We should point this out.
Definitely this was not at academy level.
This was a five-a-side tournament in Derby somewhere years ago, wasn't it? This is about 15 years ago when we were both.
Did you play?
I think I played one game and then I probably got injured. Let's be honest. I am a sick note.
I couldn't remember if you played or not. But yeah, I remember vividly someone telling me, oh, that's lad who's at Nottingham Forest Academy. Arsenal have been linked with him. I was like, oh, okay. And then we played against him. I scored from a memory, although I didn't realise who he was at the time. I didn't realise which player he was. I just remember saying, oh, he's on this team. So I've scored against Jamal Lascelles, but Kylian Mbappe didn't.
I was going to say, Kylian Mbappe is an easier foe than Ryan Dilks. You've heard it here first.
There you go. I've got a record against Jamal Lascelles, which Kylian Mbappe just doesn't have. Welcome to the number one championship podcast, the Second Tier. Thank you for joining us wherever you are. Yes, we've had the midweek games in the championship, but we'll be starting off by talking about a sacking in the championship. Technically our first sacking, because Neil Warnock was obviously a mutual termination, wasn't it? So first sacking of the championship is here for us to chat about. So we'll talk about that very shortly. We'll also talk about the rest of the games in the championship, of course. Then we'll finish off with Scott High or Ryan Lowe at the end of the show. And we'll also make our predictions, actually, for the weekend as well. So Xisgone Munoz has been sacked as Sheffield Wednesday manager. It says they've now had their worst start to a season in club history after losing 1-0 to West Brom. They've got 2 points from their first 10 games. If they lose this weekend, then they'll become only the second team in championship history to pick up 2 points or less from their first 11. If you told Wednesday fans this would be a record-breaking season, I'm not sure this is what they had in mind. We're only 10 games into the season, Justin, but even then, I think the decision to sack Isco was a bit overdue.
A bit overdue, yeah. You arguably could have gone in the last international break, although there was a slight improvement in performances, obviously that 0-0 against Leeds. But you've only got to look at his record. You've only got to look at how blunt Sheffield Wednesday going forward, how blunt they are going forward, and how vulnerable they are to being conceding goals. They are not a well-coached side, and unfortunately, Xisco Munoz has just not done anything to convince us or anybody else that he's the right man for the job. And I do think he's a victim in somewhat of Chansiri's, Davon Chansiri's terrible running of the football club, but he was never the right man for the job. Even if this team was well set to go this season with the right balance of players, with the right squad of players, he was just never the right man. His record at championship level was masked by an incredibly talented squad at Watford. So we just didn't know how well he was going to keep to the championship. And unfortunately, he hasn't. And everything's just diminished as the season has gone on. His relationship with the local press has dropped off. The line of questioning from a local journalist, if you have not seen the interview, is definitely worth watching because it is awkward, but absolutely spot on by the interviewer. And Isco had no responses. He's not had a response to any questions, any meaningful response to any questions over the course of the season, which just tells you that he's not the right man for the role.
No, he never was he? Let's be frank. We called it when the appointment was made, and it's just not gone well at all. It is hard for him to play past Ismael Assar ball when there is no Ismael Assar in this team. And let's be frank, it will probably go down as one of the worst managerial spells we've ever seen in the championship. I can't recall there ever being a manager who got just 2 points from 10 games. I imagine there must be one at some point who got something similar to that, but Isco may be the first manager to go 10 games with a side and never look like winning at any point. Every game has either been a convincing defeat or them just not laying a glove on the opposition. In fairness, it's not his fault for this mess. I do feel sorry for him because the club's all over the shop behind the scenes, and the summer as a whole was a complete and utter disaster. It was always going to be difficult to get a tune out of this side. Having said that, we've seen clubs in the past be an absolute dumpster fire off the pitch and still do quite well. Derby from a couple of seasons is an example that instantly springs to mind. Sheffield Wednesday have shown absolutely nothing. And as I say, when the appointment was made, we questioned it, didn't we? He did nothing to prove us wrong in that department. So who next is the question. And I suppose as well, are Wednesday a lost cause already, or can this be salvaged? Neil Warnock has been linked with the job. Alan Biggs, who's a reporter in that part of the world, says Warnock would be very attracted to the job, which I didn't expect, to be honest. I thought his United allegiances would rule him out of that, but apparently not, Justin.
Well, there was a story, a typical Neil Warnock story, where he tells a anecdote of conversations with a chairman of past, and Milan Mandaric nearly hired him. I think it's 2012, 10 or so years, a long time ago. Milan Mandaric nearly hired him, and that was nearly that. I think it would be a good appointment, and I don't think the Sheffield United allegiances will matter too much. He's a football man, isn't he? He lives and breathes football. He lives and breathes the challenge. This is the biggest challenge he will ever face. Before Huddersfield was a big challenge last season. Rotherham years ago was a huge challenge. Getting Cardiff, trying to keep Cardiff in the Premier League was a huge challenge when he got them up. But this is massive because his squad is poor. The chairman's a nightmare, and you're bottom of the league after the club's worst start in his history. This is the peak challenge for Neil Warnock. This is Neil Warnock career mode in its entirety. And I think he should take it. I think he should have a good go of it. And if he can get Wednesday anywhere near the chasing pack outside of the relegation zone, then I still think he would have done a good job.
Yeah, it's like he gets off on these jobs, isn't it? It's a bit demented, really. But, he just loves coming in and being the firefighter, doesn't he? I'm not sure I agree with you that it's his most difficult job, because Huddersfield were looking very bad. And he only had such a short amount of time to deal with it as well, where it's very early on in the season still. But if Warnock's interested, then I imagine it will be him. Chansiri, or whoever's in charge of making that decision right now, will just be wanting to stay up. So he's the obvious shout in that case. Local reports have said Nathan Jones will be interested, which surprised me. I think he'd be a great long-term appointment, but Wednesday will just be focused on the short term. And so Warnock makes sense. I'm surprised he wants it, partly because, as I say, of his allegiances to Sheffield United, but also because I didn't think he would want to work with Chansiri. Why would any manager with a reputation like to, quite frankly? Having said that, if he gets the job, then Wednesday's chances of staying up go from slim to none to very much alive again. And I think we all know that. This squad isn't that bad. Very poor in places, but there are some very good players here. Neil Warnock, SOS. Save the Owls of Sheffield is what I say.
Is there a signal, that like a bat signal? We need a Neil signal, a Warnock signal.
Yeah, it's his face when he's squaring up to the camera.
Yeah.
If it's basically that they shine in the sky in
Commissioner Chansiri, get it up.
Yeah, exactly. I suppose there is a question to be asked about whether the Wednesday fans will have him. I guess they probably would, considering the situation, wouldn't they?
He's such the uncle of the EFL that he could say anything and everyone still love him a little bit. I said this a few weeks ago, didn't I? And Wednesday fans typically rejected the idea, but if he keeps them in a championship, then absolutely he's bang on the money. They will get to like him, but he forces you to like him. It doesn't really matter. Apart from Leeds fans, I can't recall any teams that he's managed disliking him. He reconnects the supporters to the team again. Did that with Huddersfield last season. Such a short space of time. He's done it with previous jobs. So I think they will get to like him. If he's winning games, football fans are fickle. They're gonna latch onto it and love him to bits as long as he's winning games.
Yeah. And I imagine there will be some Wednesday fans, if Warnock does come in, who will be outraged at him coming in. At the end of the day, I don't think Chansiri really cares what the fans think anymore, do they? So, but I think they could quite quickly turn those Wednesday fans who are not too convinced by Warnock or just simply don't like him if he does keep them up, because at the end of the day, the interest of Sheffield Wednesday is what's the priority here, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Just one loss in 9 for West Brom now, going steadily along quite under the radar, but we're saying Wednesday lost to West Brom, hence why we're bringing up West Brom now. Feels like ages ago since we mentioned that result, but shout out as well for John Swift, who's now had 5 shots on target this season and scored 5 goals. That is absolutely remarkable for him, isn't it? But yeah, West Brom going a bit under the radar, aren't they? Let's move on to the team top of the Championship, and that's Leicester City. Their remarkable start to the season continues. They've now won 9 of their first 10 games after beating Preston 3-0. Sheffield United in 2005-06 are the only Championship side who can match that start. Was that Warnock? Must have been Warnock, wasn't it?
05-06, yeah.
Yeah. So just speaking about him, bringing up again. If Leicester pick up 4 points from the next 2 games, it'll be the best start ever in Championship history. Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall got 2. Must be just a bit embarrassing for him now. Oh, I've scored another goal, have I? Oh, sorry. You're at football than all of you. Get a grip. Another player who's way too good and really should be playing at this level is Wout Faes, who I wanted to talk about, Justin, because he has been ridiculously good so far for Leicester, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's been fantastic. He's in our team of the month at September for starters. If anyone wants to catch that video on YouTube, it's live now. But you've got to point out the fact that he shouldn't be playing at this level. It's quite simple. It staggers me that he's quite young as well, 25, 26, so he's in his mid-20s. But he plays with such maturity, which is the key take there. And he's by and far the most composed, happy to take risks sort of defender in this league. And you need those types of players in this Maresca system to be comfortable on the ball, to build from the back. And he does it with ease, and he defends with ease as well. And as I say, he's just making it look easy. He's not only has he, the best centre back in the league, but he's also got the best jawline and best hair in the league, which is quite the accolade for a man who is still not reached his, his peak physical potential. I think he's not in his peak years yet.
Yeah, well, you're supposed to get it in at the age of 30, I think. So if that jawline's going to improve, then wow. I mean, you could cut onions
for us.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely not for us. I mean, be careful, Justin. Don't get too close to the jawline, otherwise you might get a paper cut. But he has been unbelievable. He did cost 15 million when Leicester signed him last summer, so it should be no surprise that he's ridiculously good at Championship level. But stick at last season in the Premier League for a few high-profile errors. Stepping down to the Championship has made him look like prime Beckenbauer, partly because of the hair as well, but also because he's so comfortable on the ball. He does make me worry at times because he is so laid back, especially when he's dribbling past opposition players, but he's very good at it, so why not? And if he does make a mistake and Leicester concede, then they'll probably just go up the other end and score anyway. So he's just an extremely talented player, and you're quite right, should never have even got to the point where he's playing at this level, but he is, and he seems to be enjoying it. But yeah, so Leicester, top of the Championship now, very difficult to not see them get promoted as the things stand, isn't it? Quite an alarming drop-off for Preston. They were, of course, top of the Championship after 6 wins in a row, but they've now lost their last 2 games by a combined score of 7-0, which is quite the dramatic fall-off considering I was coining their defence the Great Wall of Lancashire, Justin.
It's the old second-tier curse going back to haunt sports. I just think it's a balancing out, and they've come up against two very clinical teams. I say clinical. West Brom, I wouldn't put West Brom in that category, but they were very clinical at the weekend. And Leicester were here. They didn't concede a whole lot of chances, which again is a positive. They just came up against teams who had really good days. I think the negative you can take from it is how one-sided this game was. But Leicester have made a lot of games this season already look quite one-sided in terms of possession. I think it's just about being braver on the ball, but it's probably not the reaction Ryan Lowe would have been after, because the first Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall goal, for example, was really poor, giving away the ball where they did. So yeah, there's a lot to work on, but I think this is a team that's still going through the motions in personnel, which again, come up against 2 teams who have been very clinical, which is probably the key takeout. They certainly won't allow that to happen again. Another hammering, that is.
Yeah, well, defensively, they're much better than they've shown in the last 2 games. We've seen that from the first, 8 games of the season so far, haven't we? Because defensively, they are a very good side, but for some reason, the standards have really dropped over the last 2 games. I think we'd both be lying, Justin, if we said that we expected Preston to keep up their remarkable form. I don't think we ever thought they would be realistically in the conversation for the top 2, maybe even not the top 6. I think they could definitely have a shout of it, but if it were to happen, I'd be quite surprised if they were actually finishing the top 6 this season. But look, it's been quite a concerning drop-off. Their results had definitely been better than their performances in the first 8 games. And so now it's a point where Ryan Lowe's got to say, we can either capitalise on that good start, or it's just going to, kind of mask this drop-off that they're having now. So that's the thing for Preston. It's just about where they go from this point. But it's certainly not been very good over the past 2 games, even though Leicester are a very difficult side to face, of course. Ipswich have now picked up 25 points from a possible 30 after beating Hull 3-0. Only 3 teams in Championship history have picked up more points after 10 games than Kieran McKenna's side. One of them is obviously the team above them currently in the table. And it's just a ridiculous standard being set by this top 2, isn't it? 2 of the best points tallies ever at this stage in a Championship season happening in the same season.
It's quite remarkable, really, when you consider that. I don't understand. I don't think Championship fans or any followers or anyone new coming into the league understand quite how difficult it is to set that sort of standard this early on in the season. We saw Burnley go through the motions last season. Sheffield United took a while to get going. But yeah, Leicester and Ipswich have been absolutely fantastic. And, they're swiping away teams with relative ease. Ipswich are a bit of a tennis game sometimes, or basketball match sometimes. But, how clinical they are, how easy they make it look in terms of their quick transitions from back to front on the counter attack, and the way they set traps for pressing. It's quite fantastic to see a team do it, and a team coming up from the League One doing it. They didn't have an overhaul in the summer either. It's quite similar to their squad last season. So you got to praise Kieran McKenna for putting in a system that just gets everyone clicking. That's very rare. It's a very difficult thing to do. Liam Rossini's done it at Hull, but Ipswich made Hull look like a relegation fodder in this game. They were that good. They were brilliant.
Yeah, they absolutely were brilliant. And going back to what you were saying, Justin, 8 or 9 wins from your first 10 games in a season barely ever happens, does it? And it's easy to forget when you've got 2 teams doing it this season, but that is a ridiculous achievement by these 2 sides. But we've got to remember, one of these teams is effectively a Premier League side with a bunch of players who should be playing in the top half of the Prem, and he's also got one of the biggest budgets we've ever seen at this level as well, while the other one are a newly promoted side with a pretty average budget for this level. And it's insane how well Ipswich have started, and Leicester doing just as well perhaps takes the shine off it, but it shouldn't, because what Ipswich are doing is simply phenomenal. People said we were mad for putting Ipswich in the top 2 of our league table predictions. They're making all those who laughed at us look very silly now. But let's be honest, as high as our hopes were for Ipswich this season, I don't think we or anybody else expected a start this incredible. People said we were mad for putting Kieran McKenna top of our manager rankings. This is why. He's a world-class coach who's got this side, Justin, he was coaching at Manchester United. So I think he is a world-class coach. Don't start pulling faces at me, dear boy. But he's got this side playing incredibly well and playing some really nice football along the way. And look, the squad isn't the strongest in terms of talent, but each player has been brought in to make this team a unit. It's excellent recruitment matched with incredible coaching. And worth mentioning as well, Ipswich missed out on quite a few targets this summer. Ellis Sims, Scott Twine, Jadon Philogene, just a few who come to mind. But it doesn't seem to faze them at all that they missed out on these players. And I imagine a lot of people will be saying, oh, Ipswich will drop off. I think those people will be very surprised. Why would they? They've been playing excellently. Will they finish in the top 2? I don't know. But they've certainly they're certainly going to be right up there come the end of the season. I'm sure of that. The Ipswich are going up tractor has rockets tied to it at this point, Peachy.
That's a fair assessment. Someone did message me on Twitter about getting on board this tractor. And I think this is the performance that makes me go, ooh, maybe, I'm twitching a little bit. Maybe I do want to get on, because Hull, they've lost 7 games under Liam Rossini since he was appointed last November going into this game. To swap them aside with relative ease, it's quite a statement, because they are a very good team, Hull, and that needs to be taken into account. So I am I'm on the edge of my seat in the waiting
Oh.
room, and I'm thinking I might get a ticket. I don't want to miss out here.
Justin, I did say next international break is your deadline to get on board. You've got the weekend. I'll let you think about it for the next 3 days, and then you've got to make a decision whether you're getting on board or not. I mean, if you're not getting on board after, 8 wins from 10 games, I don't think you'll ever get on board. So Ed Sheeran also made an appearance in the changing rooms after this game. What do you think of that, Justin? You're a big fan, aren't you?
I tried to think of, when you said Ed Sheeran, I tried to think of a song line to try and play in there. I can't. Music's a bit shit for me. That's just personal opinion. Fair play to him. I'm sure he's a nice guy.
You're just thinking out loud, aren't you, Justin?
Is that a line?
That's a song.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I can see the Ed Sheeran puns. We're not going to get very far with this one, are we? Do you know any Ed Sheeran songs?
I know Galway Girl just because it's quite easy to remember, City or a city in Ireland, very well known city in Ireland. It's very easy to think of a song off the back of that.
Yeah. A-Team. Did you know that one?
Oh, that's really old.
Yeah, that's quite an old song, but
that's
probably his best song, to be honest.
Yeah. It was in Yesterday with that Beatles movie, and he's also in Game of Thrones. That's all I know. That's all I can really say.
Yeah, I didn't rate that movie. Anyway, it's Hull's first loss since the opening day. They've had a cracking start, which has gone a bit under the radar, and it's no shame losing to Ipswich, even though the scoreline and performance was perhaps not the best. But look, Hull are going very well, aren't they?
But they are. I think the only thing is they need to tweak the away form a little bit because they've won one and drawn the rest, and obviously lost this one. So there is certainly a lot of improvements that need to be made away from home. But this team is it's revolving. It's going through what it needs to go through under Rossini, and it's not going to hit its peak until I'd say February, March time under Rossini. But there's no shame in losing to an Ipswich side who were just on it in this game. I think that's the only thing you can say. They were fantastic, and Hull unfortunately just couldn't match it, and that's going to happen in Championship throughout a course of a 46-game season.
Yeah, and Liam Mazzini is still a very young coach, isn't he? He's still learning on the job. I don't want that to sound patronising. I mean, it does, but he is still learning on the job, and he's not every young manager is of the standard of Kieran McKenna, who I'm starting to think is, or as I say, a world-class coach and on his way to being an elite manager, in my point of view. I've said before how excited I am about Hull. It's admittedly quite difficult to see them ending the season in the top 6 simply because there's so many teams aiming for it and many of them have a lot more resources than Hull. However, they're on the right track in the long term, and that's the main thing.
Yeah,
is worth saying. Just 2 losses after 10 games for Hull is an even better start when you consider who they faced, because they've actually had quite a tricky start to the season. So the playoffs definitely isn't out of the question. I can definitely say that. Southampton have won back-to-back games to get fully back on track. They beat Stoke 1-0 thanks to a beautiful free kick by Stuart Armstrong. That was a beauty, Justin. Just before he took it, I thought to myself, it's a shame they don't have James Ward-Prowse because this would be perfect for him. And then Armstrong puts it in the top bin. That was absolutely gorgeous.
I don't think we've seen a free kick yet this season. Not one of that distance or quality. I don't think we have, actually. We've not seen a free kick goal yet.
Why have you got to test my memory like this? I'm sure we must have had a free kick
goal. I honestly, I don't think we have. I don't think we have, because it would come to the mind quite quickly. Anyway, it's besides the point, because it was a fantastic free kick and it's quite some way out distance-wise as well, which for someone who was in James Ward-Prowse's shadow last season or previous seasons of taking free kicks, fair enough if you've got that in the locker. They clearly work together in training quite often, because that sort of technique is hard to manage.
It certainly is. I'm annoyed now that you've come out
ruined the show. Ruined the show.
Well, it's 10 games into the season. Surely someone scored a free kick already. I can't think of anyone off the top of my head, but there must have been a goal from a free kick. But quite a feisty affair, this one. Plenty of argy between the two sets of players. There were some very questionable refereeing decisions as well, which wouldn't have helped things. I think we won't go into too much detail on the decisions. Whatever the case, it's another win for Southampton. And this is a huge victory, particularly because it's a clean sheet. It's the first time they've kept a clean sheet since the 12th of March. And a lot has changed since then, Justin. ChatGPT hadn't been launched yet. Antonio Conte was still in charge of Spurs. Graham Potter was still in charge of Chelsea. That's how long their defensive woes have lasted. But finally, a clean sheet. And for me, defensively, they've come on leaps and bounds in the last 2 games. They obviously had those 2 games where they conceded 9 goals against Sunderland and Leicester. Then they were better against Ipswich and Middlesbrough, but still leaky against Leeds and Stoke. They've learnt to shut the door and keep somewhat of a lid on the opposition. They were never going to challenge near the top, or basically where they should be, if they were going to be so flimsy at the back as they were. So it's brilliant to see that they finally got a grip on that, isn't it?
It was a roll your sleeves up type of performance, this one from Southampton, and probably my favourite performance of the season from them, because when you consider those intangible variables, it was it's a tough away day. It's long travel. It's a midweek night game. Stoke made it very hard and very physical towards the end of it. Southampton needed to be up for that sort of battle. Tactically, they were spot on. Russell Martin made it really stodgy through the middle. Stoke had absolutely no answer to that. And then it was just a case of relying on the counter-attack. Yeah, sure, they didn't create as much as they have done in previous games, but they didn't need to because they were so solid. They limited Stoke. So it's this type of performance that makes me go, right, you're heading in the right direction. You can have the performances like you did against Leeds, where you can be a swashbuckling side going forward when you need to be. But this is the performance that promotion winners thrive on, because you've got to have your backs to the wall. You've got to stand up to the test. You've got to be physically ready for it. And they answered all, they ticked all those boxes against Stoke. They just need to consistently put this type of performance together. Difficult thing to do, but it's the right foundations for them to go on. The season's now started for Southampton.
Yeah, 1-0 wins are a bit boring by Southampton standards, aren't they? Because they've certainly had some high-scoring games this season. So I think more of this is what they need, really, isn't it? 4 losses from 6 now for Stoke. Very underwhelming start considering their summer business. And it's all just a bit flat there again, isn't it?
Well, they worked hard. That's what you can take from it. Yes, sure, they could have had a penalty or 2. Referee was a little bit hit and miss in this game, as you already pointed out. But they struggled to create anything clear cut, and they've struggled to really convince me without having Andre Vidigal in the team. When you've had a summer that Stoke have had, and Alex Neil cannot get more out of the players that have signed than he has done, worries me a little bit. There wasn't too many patterns of play where I've gone, ooh, these look good. Centrally, Southampton made it congested, as I said, stodgy. Stoke didn't go down the wide areas at all. They kept trying to pump it to Wesley. I don't know what the game plan was. I've not known what the game plan was for a few weeks. I know we haven't shone too much of a light on Stoke, but I don't know where they're going at the moment under Alex Neil.
Yeah, well, goals is certainly an issue. Only 4 teams have scored fewer than them, which is ridiculous considering the number of strikers they've got at the club. They've now also got only 2 fit defenders because of injury. And Stoke fans were telling us relentlessly how good their summer business was. But now look at them. If they hadn't spent the whole summer signing 100 forwards, then they might not be in the pickle that they're in with numbers at the back. And Stoke fans will tell us that refereeing decisions have not gone their way, which is fine. Maybe they haven't, but you make your own luck at the end of the day. And I imagine there's quite a few other Championship sides who will say, oh, refereeing decisions have not gone our way so far. Ultimately, Stoke look like they're going to have another pretty unremarkable season. And I don't know how they get out of this vicious cycle. I say vicious cycle. It's actually quite a dull, meandering kind of cycle.
It's the worst kind of cycle, though, isn't it? Yeah. You're just going round in circles. It's torture. It's torture for Stoke fans.
Yeah. Well, people always said about Stoke when they're in the Premier League, it's a bit boring being in the Premier League because they're just finishing mid-table every season. Now they're just finishing mid-table in the Championship every season, aren't they?
Quite a drop off.
Is possibly worse. And people may say Alex Neil, but Alex Neil is a good manager, and they've had plenty of other good managers coming at Stoke and do just as good a job as him. So what's the answer here? I don't really know. It looks like they were trying to break the mold this summer somewhat with the transfer business that they did, and it seems to be just more of the same. So where do Stoke City go from here? Let's take a quick break, Justin. After that, we'll talk about a somewhat controversial win for Leeds and Sunderland beating Watford. Welcome back to the Second Tier podcast. Leeds 1, QPR 0. Crescencio Somerville with the only goal of the game. As said just before the break, a somewhat controversial win for Leeds. It wasn't really controversial because they fully deserved to win. It was just there was a bit of controversy towards the end of the game. It was a well-deserved 3 points for Leeds. QPR didn't have a sniff in this one. The controversy comes from Ismael being sent off for a challenge on Patrick Bamford. I think it's fair to say there was minimal contact in that one. And you weren't impressed, Justin, were you?
Minimal contact. There was zero contact. There are two things you need to consider here. Bamford's got previous, and Begovic is nowhere near fast enough to get anywhere near Bamford. That's not disrespect to Begovic. He'll probably admit that himself. He's a big guy. Like he's massive, isn't he? But this dive from Bamford is horrendous. The guy's an experienced striker. He was once in the England fold, and he's still doing this sort of thing. It's very rare that you do get this sort of level of play acting. And for me, there's no room for it. It's horrendous. And hopefully, the red card gets rescinded for Asmir Begovic because he was nowhere near Patrick Bamford. And upon the replay, you can clearly see that there was no contact. It wasn't the dive; it was the feigning of the injury after as well. It was like 10 out of 10 on how to cheat in football. It was just shocking, really. It was shit. Don't do that. You're an experienced striker. We've got a nice game of football going on here. You don't need to dive. It's a convincing game for Leeds. Come on, Patrick. That's not good.
Well, do you think he should be banned, just in retrospectively?
Yeah, absolutely. I can't remember what the minimum is, but I would suggest a minimum 1 to 3 game ban on that. Whatever Begovic would have had, it would probably been a 1 game ban because it was a serious foul, well, not a serious foul play, but it was last man, wasn't he? So yeah, I think there should be a retrospective ban because it was the worst form of cheating you can see in game. It's really bad.
Yeah. I'm not going to disagree with you, Justin. I think I don't get my back up as much as other people do when it comes to diving, but this was pretty blatant, wasn't it? And you're quite right. It's right at the end of the game. Leeds are 1-0 up. They've not been in any danger throughout the whole game. So there was no need really for Bamford to do that. So I wouldn't disagree with you. I think if there was a ban, I think I'd probably say that would be fair.
Just did it to be a dick. And we don't like that in football. Don't be a dick.
Just don't be a dick, guys. I think now's possibly a good chance for us to talk about refereeing this season, because I remember last season we were saying actually the standard of refereeing wasn't too bad, and we got a bit of blowback from that. But I think really Championship fans are always going to complain about the standard of refereeing because it's never going to be 100% perfect, and fans just don't seem to tolerate anything less. This season, though, it seems to have taken a step back. I mean, this game week alone, we had the Bamford dive, and Stoke had a blatant penalty turned down. There were incidents at the weekend as well, which were quite standouts. The Ainsworth, Sinclair Armstrong, penalty in the QPR game. That was just a blatant penalty. It does seem like we've gone backwards a bit with refereeing in the Championship again, doesn't it? When I thought we were making progress.
Yeah, you missed out Zian Fleming delivering the people's elbow on Kane Kessler-Hayden as well in the Millwall game, in the Millwall Plymouth game. But you are right that it does seem that we've had a significant drop off, and I think that's down to the Premier League. It's almost a brain drain, if anyone's familiar with economic terms. It's almost a brain drain of quality that gets plucked from the EFL into the Premier League because these officials get fast tracked because of the demands of VAR. Now, I'm not going to go on about VAR. We've all heard the clip. We've the Spurs game. We've all seen the controversy. We don't need to lend any more into that. But there's this, officials that clearly aren't ready for that step up. Need to bide the time in the EFL a little bit more, and then obviously from that you're getting officials who aren't ready to step up into the Championship because it is a mini Premier League in a sense. The games are fast, the games are quick. It's 46 games across the season. It's Saturday, Tuesday. There's a lot of demand there, and unfortunately, I just don't think the officials are quite at the quality they need to be to really come in and thrive. You look at Jared Gillett, for example, who was fantastic. He's a fantastic official in the EFL, and then he gets plucked into the Premier League because they need extra officials for VAR and everything to do with that. So I think that's the key issue here is just officials are getting fast tracked when they're probably not quite ready to step up to the division.
Well, Jared Gillett's a fantastic example because he was brought in from Australia, wasn't he? Or whether he just moved here, I don't really know. But that is something that maybe the FA needs to look at doing a bit more often. But I think a good example of what you were saying there about referees being fast-tracked is the referee in the Stoke game, who, by all accounts, had a bit of a nightmare, is a lad who I think he's only 26. He's not very old at all. And when you're dealing with a bunch of massive blokes who are quite, in most cases, a lot older than him, then it must be quite intimidating for him, especially when he's got 20,000 fans or so on his back with every decision that he makes as well. So I don't know. I think I do agree with you that VAR does take away officials from the Championship when we could desperately need them. Like Darren England's obviously been in the news quite a lot over the past few days, but is an experienced referee who has refereed plenty of games at this level, but is now being taken away from them. So everyone's got to make the step up from, from League One and what have you. And it's not great. And I think the standard refereeing has been talked about quite a lot in general over the past few days in particular, but it seems to have been amplified even more in the Championship. And it does make the whole system look a bit farcical.
Well, that's it. We don't get any transparency on the system at all. I think Joe Barton said that, for example, professional footballers need to be involved in making these decisions. I don't think that's true. I think the rules don't help, and that's where ex-professionals can really come in and add context to situations when developing these rules. But like I said, the main issues here are the fact that officials are stepping up to VAR when they should be refereeing in games. That's their specialism. They should be VAR specific officials, VAR specifically trained officials that can deal with that sort of level of technology and getting to the point in terms of to the crisp of the law and making decisions. I don't think those officials that are developed in game should be fast tracked into those situations. So that will essentially give us a good pool of officials for the Championship and EFL. That's the key take out there.
Yeah, there's a much wider discussion to be had here, but we must move on. Let's go to Sunderland, who beat Watford 2-0. 6 wins from 8 now for Sunderland. They are going very well. And this was a home win too, despite concerns about their performances at the Stadium of Light. So they'll be fancying their chances this season. The same can't be said about Watford, who are now 21st with just 9 points from 10 games. The kind of form which is definitely worthy of a new contract. And they only went and bloody did it, Justin. They gave Valérien Ismael a new contract. The Watford Twitter admin sneakily disguised the statement to make it look like he was getting the sack. Sneaky admin. They know the audience, don't they? But this just seems mad, Justin, giving a new contract to a manager when Watford, of all teams, are 21st.
Yeah, it's probably the worst run of form under a new manager that I can remember in terms of points at the start of the season anyway. But it does, I think it's a vocal commitment to a new era at the club. The Pozzos have created such a huge reputational damage from a PR perspective of hiring and firing. That's it feels like it's changing. They're chucking their weight behind Valérien Ismael, which, as I say, is a commitment to moving forward. I think that's the key thing here. It doesn't make sense on any logical level to award a new contract to a manager who signed a 3-year deal in the summer and also hasn't really earned that through results yet. But for me, I think it's not an Ismael decision. It's look, we're changing as a football club. We're committed to this guy. We want to go forward with him. We're not going to sack him. If we do, it's going to be very expensive for us. But yeah, as I say, I think it's a PR thing for Watford and a commitment to changing to the cause.
We'll just point out Rob Edwards had also managed 11 games at this point. He had 14 points to his name at this stage, whereas Valérien Ismael, of course, has 9. So they've sacked managers for a lot less. And it goes back to what I was saying before. He had a 3-year contract. That's perfectly fine, Watford. We get that you've had commitment issues in the past, but they've gone too far the other way, haven't they? I just can't recall a manager ever being given a new contract for 2 wins from 10 games unless they're fighting to stay up. I mean, after the Sunderland game, Ismael took nearly 2 hours to come out and speak to the press. He said he wanted answers from every single player about what's going wrong. It's not the kind of thing that screams new contract, is it?
Well, you say that, but he's engaging more with the press for starters than most managers have at Watford. And I just feel like it's a page has been turned for them. They're going with Ismael, and as I say, I don't think performances have been terrible. I just think there are key issues in the squad that need to be addressed, and Ismael's still finding his way through them. There's certainly quality in that squad. It's just whether or not there's enough personalities and leaders. But Ismael, I think, is showing the right cojones that he's capable of steering his team out of it. And I think keeping the team in after the game, for example, I think is they're all vocal suggestions that they are changing as a club. The tides are turning, the winds are changing. Any sort of cliche you need from that perspective. I just think Watford are trying everything in the book, and Ismael saying that after the game, I think is a chance to get the fans on board as well, that they are committed to getting the form right as well.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. Just now, I think Watford should stick with Ismael. I don't think they're going to get anywhere if they keep hiring and firing managers, but it does feel like Watford have made a rod for their own back now. Because if it gets to Christmas or even before that, and they're still in the same position, a decision is going to have to be made. And I wouldn't blame them in that case. It's just, not sacking a manager after 10 games like they usually do. Middlesbrough are flying now, 3 wins from 3 after beating Cardiff 2-0. It's all just suddenly clicked for Borough, hasn't it? The most remarkable thing is the last team to avoid defeat against them was Sheffield Wednesday, of all teams. I'm wondering how far Borough could go. We obviously saw them last season, how that went despite a slow start. Could we see a repeat?
Maybe. I like to think that they took my advice from a few weeks ago, that they internally sent a memo around sacking Michael Carrick and then rehired him to kickstart their form. I think I'd like to suggest that has happened. I doubt it though, because that's lunacy. But you are right. It is a clicking of things going forward. I think the key thing here, I think, is go back to it clicking. I think it's clicked in both boxes. They are looking a little bit more efficient defensively. Things aren't going against them in the way of conceding from every shot. That's what it felt like at times, but they're also putting their chances away, which is absolutely massive, and they're taking them at the right times as well. Sure, this wasn't a hugely brilliant performance against Cardiff, but tactically they were switched on to Cardiff's weaknesses. They hammered Cardiff's right-hand side. Lucas Engel was highly effective in this game, and he deserves a shout out because he's been really poor in terms of his form since he came in, but he grabbed an assist. It was much needed. And then you've got Isaiah Jones really clicking as well. It's just all coming into place for Middlesbrough, and performances have suggested that's going to happen at some point. It's just whether or not they can outrun their lack of clinicalness going forwards.
Yeah, clinicalness, that's a word. As we've said repeatedly, they've only had 1 or 2 bad performances, haven't they? Otherwise, they have been playing well. And I think it's just been about putting chances away, and it's started happening all of a sudden. I think Emmanuel Latelath starting to find the back of the net is really important. He scored in the cup last week, took his goal brilliantly against Cardiff. So hopefully he starts firing, because obviously Borough spent a lot of money on him, but his confidence just seemingly deserted him. And Lucas Engel is another one who you mentioned there, Justin. He's been low on confidence, but had a great game against Cardiff. So it's all started coming together for Borough, and we always thought it would. The question was more about when than if, and they look revitalised, and it's very exciting to see. Could we see a repeat of last season? I wouldn't rule it out. Birmingham got their first win in 6 after a 4-1 win over Huddersfield, a very much overdue victory for Birmingham. They've certainly been playing a lot better than results suggest, so this was a long time coming. Is this a showing of the task that Darren Moore has on his hands at Huddersfield, Justin?
Yeah, I think so. I think you're just looking at the squad here, because I don't think the performances, a bit like under Neil Warnock, I don't think the performances have merited the results that they've had. And this certainly wasn't a 4-1 game. They created a decent volume of chances, but it's just that lack of quality that's on show. And that, unfortunately, is probably why we're looking at Huddersfield as one of those teams that are going to be looking over the shoulder, not wanting to get relegated, thinking on trying to stay away from the bottom 3 as opposed to kicking forwards. I know a lot of Huddersfield's fans disagreed earlier on in the week, but the last 3 games is just a microcosm of what Darren Moore has got in terms of the job he's undertaking. There are elements of quality in the team, but Moore needs more time to get the team organised and work out a way he wants to go with the squad, because there's a solid blueprint there left by Neil Warnock. It's just whether or not they can click going forward and find that bit of quality they need to put away those chances to make games more convincing, because this essentially wasn't.
Yeah, I'd agree with all of that. Swansea scored late on to beat Norwich 2-1. My theory from the weekend was that Norwich are a bit of a one-man team, because when Gabriel Sara plays well, Norwich play well. But he actually played well here, and Norwich were a bit second best. So I'm not sure if that actually strengthens my theory or not, but whatever the case. A late winner from Haji Wright saw Coventry beat Blackburn 1-0. Back-to-back wins for them now. Another one who just seemed to have clicked all of a sudden. Quite a few seem to have in the past week. A 95th minute winner from Tommy Conway saw Bristol City win 2-1 away at Rotherham. Rotherham's away form is dire. So if they're not getting something from home games like Bristol City, no disrespect to Bristol City, of course, then Rotherham are deep, deep trouble. And Gary Rowett quieting down criticism of him for now with a 2-0 win away at Plymouth. It's a very Rowett thing to do, isn't it? They'll probably go on to win 2 out of every 4 games for the remainder of the season and finish 9th. And the cycle just repeats itself. It's worth mentioning as well, Zian Fleming should have... he set up the final goal, but there was a
bit of a red card.
Yeah, it was a bit of a bad challenge. I'm not sure how even a free kick wasn't given. Anything more serious. Anyway, let's have a look ahead to the weekend. So in each midweek episode of the second tier, Justin and I each pick a banker, a team we think is guaranteed to win this coming weekend, as well as an outsider, so someone we think is going to win, but has bigger odds with the bookies than their opponents. We're tracking how we do as the season goes on. 1 point for a correct banker, 2 points for an outsider. Whoever loses has to do a forfeit, which will be a CrossFit workout for myself. Justin, on the other hand, will be doing a coach trip from Sunderland to Plymouth and back. The current scores are 10-8 to myself. Justin closed the gap after I had an absolute stinker last weekend. You're looking very smug, Justin.
I was. I struggled not to contain my excitement both on Sunday's episode and in this episode because, I was buzzing. I was buzzing with last weekend, 100%. For all those naysayers who say I don't know anything about football, middle finger to you guys.
Yeah. A broken clock is right twice a day.
Here we go.
Justin, what is your banker for the weekend?
I've gone with Leicester to beat Stoke at home. Leicester are cruising at the moment. It seems a bit of an easy one, but Stoke have just won. Have won just once away from home, and that came in the last game against Bristol City, where they came from 2-0 down. But it didn't convince in that. I didn't convince against Southampton. Looked poorly drilled as well compared to that Leicester, who were just getting started, shall we say?
Yeah, I think this is a pretty obvious banker, isn't it? My banker is also pretty obvious. It's Southampton to win at home against Rotherham. Southampton look to have turned a corner, while Rotherham's away form is absolutely abysmal. They've nearly gone a whole year without a win on their travels and lost every game on the road so far. So it'd be a massive turn up for the Bucks if they were to get anything from this one. My outsider for the weekend is Middlesbrough to win away at Sunderland. Now, it was a bit of a tricky one picking an outsider this weekend, but Middlesbrough flying all of a sudden. Well, Sunderland are a bit hit and miss at home. They've been in excellent form recently, but I wouldn't be 100% putting my money on them at home right now. So I could see Middlesbrough feasibly getting something here. Justin, what's your outsider?
I've played the game a little bit here. For some reason, Millwall are favourites against Hull. So I'm going with Hull to beat Millwall. It's that inability to generate some consistency at home, and Hull's record's actually pretty decent. They've won a fair share of their away games so far under Liam Messina, and they're not going to want a repeat of that performance against Ipswich. They're going to be up and ready for a Gary Rowett duel, shall we say?
Yeah, very difficult to beat, aren't they, Hull? So I can definitely see that happening as well. No news this week. There just isn't that much that's happening. So instead, we'll get straight on to this.
Scott High or Ryan Lowe?
Your best is fucking shit, mate.
Yes, it's time for Scott High or Ryan Low. This is the game where we have to rank 4 things from highest to lowest. There's 3 questions, and this week I'll be providing the questions for Justin. Are you ready, Peachy boy?
Always ready. Let's go.
Lovely. Here's a list of West Brom managers. Can you rank them on who's managed the most competitive games for the Baggies? Carlos Corberán, Steve Bruce, Valérien Ismael, Alan Pardew.
Oh, God. Corberán's been in charge for almost a year, so you'd expect him to almost complete that calendar cycle of 46 games. So I'm going to go Corberán top, then Steve Bruce, then Ismael, then Pardew.
He's only gone and bloody nailed it, ladies and gentlemen. I tell you what, though, it's close. It's a lot closer than you think it was. Corberán has only managed 33 games, Steve Bruce 32, Ismael 31, Pardew 21. I was convinced you'd get Ismael and Bruce mixed up because it doesn't feel like Bruce was there that long.
It feels like Ismael was there for a shorter amount of time, though, because he was there until the end of January, wasn't he? And then Bruce came in and depressed everybody.
Yeah, I also completely forgot Alan Pardew was even at West Brom.
Taxigate.
Taxigate?
The Barcelona taxi scenario under Alan Pardew.
Is that with Gareth Barry?
Yeah. Where they stole an Uber.
Dear. Finn, producer Finn, you might want to just check that one's legally correct before we publish that. If not, just bleep it out. Anyway, let's move on. Here's a bunch of Argentinians. Can you rank them on who's made the most appearances in the championship? Julio Arca, Luciano Becchio, Alejandro Fallin, Emmanuel Ledesma.
So that's a heavy Middlesbrough vibe there. Ledesma and Arca.
Argentinians.
Absolutely. Becchio was a consistent player up until leaving for Norwich. I'm going to go Becchio top. Julio Arca had a couple of spells in the championship, but he was riddled with knee injuries. But so too was Alejandro Fallin. So I'm going to go Becchio, Fallin, Arca, Ledesma.
No, just not very correct at all. Julio Arca, 137 appearances. That's the most. Alejandro Fallin, 118. Luciano Becchio, 115. Don't know if you're forgetting that he was in the Premier League for a little bit, I think. And
didn't play, though.
He didn't play, but he was absent from the Championship, obviously, during that time. And obviously, he had a lot of time in League One with Leeds, didn't he? And Emmanuel Ledesma had 90 appearances. So you were right with that one, at least. And finally, Justin, your final question is this. I want you to rank these tinned items on how much they cost. Branston baked beans, Prince's beef stew, Heinz cream of tomato soup, Baxter's lentil and vegetable soup. This is according to their price at Morrison's. Other supermarkets are available.
Yeah, tomato is criminally expensive. Tomato soup. It's horrendous, especially Heinz. You robbing bastards. I'm going to go with tomato soup. Is this one tin or a multi-pack of 4?
Nope, just one tin.
One tin, okay. I'm going to go soup, Heinz soup, then the baked beans, then the beef stew, because I feel like meat sauces are just cheap because it's not actual meat. And then whatever the final one was, I can't remember what it was.
Lentil and vegetable soup.
I like lentil and vegetable soup, but that's quite cheap.
You could have not got that more wrong if you tried. That was completely all over the place. The Prince's beef stew was £2.49. Heinz cream of tomato soup was £1.70. £1.70 for some tomato soup. Jesus Christ. Baxter's lentil and vegetable soup were £1.60. The Branston baked beans was £1.
It's good value for baked beans there. Who's paying £2.50 or £2.49 for tinned beef stew? Absolutely horrendous.
It's a fair point.
Horrendous.
Morrison's is very expensive, though. However, I do think it's probably the best supermarket, in my opinion.
That is a debate for another day, because I cannot disagree anymore with you. That is horrendous shout. Horrendous shout.
It's just a very good supermarket. There we go, ladies and gentlemen. We're not sponsored by Morrison's. This has been the Second Tier Podcast. We'll be back again on Sunday to go through all the games coming up in the Championship this weekend, as well as talk about any news that happens over the next couple of days. Maybe we'll have a new Wednesday manager in place. So, this has been the Second Tier Podcast. I've been Ryan Dilks.
I've been Justin Peach.
And a big thank you for listening.